So I want you to look at this picture, because the form of it you will see tomorrow when you will visit the monasteries, I think in Moldovica. Here you may see a scale. Yes, of course, it's a different kind of scale, but a very important one, because it shows us three types of different elements. We have a feather, wood, and a rock. And of course, why did I say that you will find it tomorrow? Because in our ethnography you will find a scale, and this is a very important motive, because we have the waging of the soul. And when a soul is waged, well, we know he's into trouble, or he's into eternal salvation. And you will see such a scale, but a normal one, of course, in which the soul of a person is being waged, and his conscience is the one that gives him the possibility to be saved or damned. You will see tomorrow a scale in which the soul is on one side of in one part of it, and demons are trying to put that soul down, and angels are throwing arrows to demons in order to save the soul. So this is just a teaser for tomorrow. You also, now I'm asking myself, and Suleiman can help me, that we know that in ancient Egypt, the soul is also being waged, and we have the feather of the truth, mat, that wages the soul. And now I'm thinking if maybe Christians have adopted this motif of the soul as a feather, and if it may be saved or damned. I'm trying to propose a discussion over three elements: the will, the conscience, and synderesis. And maybe at the end you will be able to tell to me which of these three elements do you think they are. If synderesis is a feather, if conscience is a rock, or if our own will represents that wood, and it's just your opinion, and I'm interested in finding it out. First of all, I will try to define my terms, very short definitions. We know, and what is I understand through conscience, of course, a Christian perspective of understanding conscience, is that it always represents a knowledge of ourselves, or awareness of moral principles that we have committed to, or assessment to ourselves, or motivations to act that comes from within us. We know the difference in medieval texts of conscience and consciousness. Consciousness, it's actually a modern term. It means something else. Is that what lies underneath our unconscious? But I will try just now, in order to stress upon the Christian perspective. In medieval texts we have the words, not only in medieval texts, of course, these are ancient, from the ancient Greek philosophers. We have the word syneidesis, that means a co-knowledge, or conscientia, a knowledge that we share with someone. But what about this term that I've already put into discussion, synderesis? Well, we find it as transliterated like this, from synteresis, and this is a Greek word. We do not know if it is a mistake of the copyists. It means to look after. And we shall see if this faculty of the soul is looking after us. The concept of conscience has traditionally been used to refer to moral knowledge that is shared with oneself, as I said, and this reference to the self does not rule out that the source of the morality in question be external to the self. For example, it might be God, as we are Christians or not, as in the Christian tradition or in any other messianic religions, or have you discussed eschatological religions, or the influence of one's culture or one's upbringing. And so this is the scheme that I propose, because these faculties of the soul must be in a perfect equilibrium in order for the human being to exist in a normal way. So synderesis is defined in medieval times and in Christian philosophy, because we have that philosophy until now. This, of course, is the voluntaristic perspective, the one that I approve and the one that I think that is more accurate than the intellectualist one. So synderesis is that innate orientation towards good. In other words, the example that they come and use, and this is very good because today we have the opportunity of riding a horse. Well, synderesis acts like a horseman. And and conscience sometimes is the horse. And if one sins, well, we must say that it's never the fault of synderesis, because the horseman, because the horse is naughty, because synderesis is never wrong. It is that voice that always tells us what we are doing, right or wrong. It is the voice, it's like a radio. You may never turn it off completely, you may just limit its voice. It is the voice that renders also in the damned ones, and even the devil has synderesis, but he tends not to listen to it. And whenever synderesis speaks to him, he's just trying not to take it into consideration. In this sense, conscience has been defined as a distinction between right and wrong and applying the moral principles in a certain context. And that refers, of course, to the intellect. And will is complicated. We'll talk about it another time. And in order to define my scheme, this is the way in which I see the problem of the world, so to say. I mean, evil appears in two of these contexts. The first context is the context of ignorance. When in that human soul, synderesis exists, because synderesis always exists, so that soul is oriented towards good all the time. The soul has the will of doing good, but he has problems of conscience, because he distinguishes between right and wrong, but he's not able, because his conscience is not so well trained to apply those principles. So he has an innate conscience, but the habitual conscience is lacking exercise. So I know that I have to respect my neighbor, I know that I have to respect my parents, but when I am in that certain context that I have to respect these principles, well, I'm not capable of understanding what to do next. And I shout at my mother, and I hit my neighbor, or I stole his cat, or something like that. So, in order to get revenge. In the other context, and this is a very complicated one, and I must say that until today I have no answer to it. In that soul, synderesis exists, it is truly oriented towards good. Conscience is always, it's full, it's also innate and habitual. He understands to distinguish between the principle, between good and wrong. He knows how to apply these principles, he's well trained in applying it in a certain context, but he lacks the will of doing it. So it's, how can I say, he's obstinate in doing evil things because he wants to do evil, because he has a certain gratification in doing evil. But we may also find in Aristotle, and this is a different thing, the term of akrasia, or that is, I lack the power of controlling my own will. I am so weak that I want to do good, I desire it, but it's not enough. I know that I have to prepare my presentation in order to be fully aware of myself when I have to speak, but then I prefer to watch that movie, to eat that cake, to do anything else that I have to do, and not do my presentation, and stay up late, and so on and so on. Somebody calls, in our modern times, they call it procrastination. Well, I must say that I am a full representative of that thing. I don't know how I ended up on doing so many years of school and having a PhD when I procrastinated so much. But I may say that geniuses are like this, and I hope that after I'll be dead, I will be remembered as a genius person, and I'll be safe. So, coming back to consciousness, we speak about sharing moral knowledge with oneself and what this knowledge implies. So we think, what one may share. Of course, knowledge of moral standards of principle. With whom you may share it? Well, with an imaginary witness, such as an ideal observer, for instance, a god, I know, an imagined moral model, or an impartial spectator. We examine ourselves, we observe one's behavior like a judge, we tend to judge ourselves, we tend to approve or disapprove our behavior, we tend to speak in Christian terms of acquittal or condemnation, because, you know, Christ does not condemn us, he only lets our conscience to speak for us. The conscience is that condemns or acquits us after we die. But I'm very curious to put into discussion this problem and to discuss it when we will talk at the round table. What happens with these people that lack conscience, that are being defined as pathological subjects who display antisocial behavior and systematically act without regard to what they consider to be right or wrong? They say that they have a certain defect, that a link is broken in them. I'm talking about psychopaths now. And if we may find such a thing, if these persons may be recovered by the society. Our colleague told us that psychopathy does not exist. Well, I think, okay, we may not use this term, but I think that some problems are to be discussed. And I always wanted you to show you a beautiful example of how these aspects of evil, conscience and things may be surpassed if one is educated. And this is the example of a nursery in Seattle, where elderly people are put into contact with younger people, and so they learn from each other. So kids exercise their will of doing good, their will of empathy, and elder people are not feeling alone anymore. And there is a change between them, a cultural change, a change through generations, and I think it's a benefit for everybody. And I really think that in our that in our schools and the curricula, these things has to be not optional but compulsory one. Because kids exercise empathy, and they should know that they are responsible for themselves, for others, but most of all for the entire creation. Because I think this is our problem, that our children do not learn responsibility since they are little. So it would be very good if they knew how to take care of a plant or an animal, and then after themselves and of other people. And this is my conclusion, that when God gave us the world, and the text in Hebrew I think is like this, and I will be a smartass and quote it in Hebrew, when he says, let's make God in our own image, נעשה אדם בצלמנו כדמותנו וירדו בדגת הים, ובעוף השמיים ובבהמה ובכל הארץ ובכל הרמס הרומס על הארץ. He says, בדגת, וירדו, that word, does not mean to rule over others. Actually, it means that man has to take responsibility over others. And this is the correct translation of the word, vedu. And I think that this is what we must do from now on, to be responsible for ourselves and for the entire creation of God, in order to be a better place and that we may live on. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Florina. I think it's a wonderful presentation to end up with. Yes, and as Julian said, since he's not here, but I will make him present. He said Hebrew language has an answer for everything. Now I have an answer coming from the Hebrew language, Hebrew theology, to this kind of problem related to synderesis. So the rabbis say like that. In each and every man, and woman, of course, women are included, all inclusive. In each and each and every human being, there is a battle between two inclinations. Sergei will come with the continuation in Christian theology. The good inclination, which is Yetzirah Tov, this is synderesis, which means we always have in us this orientation towards good. It is a seed we have in ourselves. And this is called Yetzirah Tov, the good inclination. And we also have Yetzirah Ha, the bad inclination. So, it is an inner battle. Every time Yetzirah Tov is winning, the behavior corresponds to what we understand by being good. Every time Yetzirah Ha is winning, we have the other wrong situation. So this would be an answer coming from the Jewish theology, yes, which is actually a very important topic. This Yetzirah Ha, what is the inclination towards evil? Why we do this? It is an inclination, an orientation we have now. It is the other seed we have to fight with. So that.
I hope my Hebrew quotation was accurate because
it's very nice.
I'm just a beginner in it. So.
It's very nice. It's very nice.
Florina, regarding the translation of the synthetics, but now your translation that you mentioned is the true one. Yeah, because you find synthetics and in the writings of John the Chrysostom, he mentions synthetics and sometimes he mentions hypostaetics. But synthetics is for the inner dimension. So yeah, you is.
So for a while I thought I was listening to the Apostle Paul. If you haven't read the letter to Romans, epistle to Romans, chapter 7, lately, then you definitely quoted it almost, or paraphrased it, about the inner struggle I have. I know what's good and I'd like to do it, but I don't have the strength to do it.
I know
This,
the
yeah, of course.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so I thought it was quite cute.
But I didn't thought about it when I wrote the presentation.
No?
No, at all.
Okay.
You can add it.
Yes, I will.
Then of course, Romans 2, you also quoted about conscience condemning people and so on. But Romans 2, that context. Now again, I don't know if you knew that passage. If you had it in your mind when you wrote it, maybe not. Okay, because that passage says that only those who don't know about Christ will be judged by their consciences, but the Christians will be judged by Christ.
By the law of Christ, yes.
Yes. Just a correction. That this is not really interesting or important. What is important is your question. What do we do about this, right? Not having the will to do it, right? And there, I think, again, now speaking from a Christian theological perspective, what might help is the biblical idea of the indwelling Christ in the believer, whatever that might mean, of course. But it's an important motive in Galatians, for example, 2:20, where Paul says, "No longer do I live, but Christ in me." And for Paul, at least, this would be the solution to the problem. So whenever I'm left alone to myself, I tend to fall or falter or, be imperfect, be lazy, procrastinate, and all of those things that I know so well myself. But when I intensely live in faith, somehow it's not just some logical conclusions of my mind or some agreement with some church dogma, but somehow it's this personal indwelling of Christ in me as a believer that somehow changes me from within. So I start to radiate, right? So my will is sort of redirected and so on. And then we could discuss, how can this happen? But I think, and we don't have time, but I think it might be a good idea to play with, what is really the New Testament answer to this huge question that you posed? Because it's a very important question. Not just ethically, but it surpasses ethics. It's really a life orientation as such. So I just suggest that you maybe, look at these passages and try to play with these
Thank
ideas.
you very much. I think that this is a real and important answer. But the problem is that we only may succeed in it by praying, by a lot of prayer, I think, like an ascesis. In order to be fully aware of yourself, you have to pray a lot. I mean, in order to do this, I mean, whenever I am weak, I want to be strong, and Christ has to dwell in me, then I really have to pray for Him, because I think this is important. But I have to confess that sometimes I also procrastinate in praying.
Yeah.
And this is the problem. How do I exercise and strengthen myself
Yeah.
to let Christ and to give Him the opportunity of dwelling inside me? Of course, for communion. And
Yeah. Perhaps our limitation is our individualism.
I know,
Yeah.
I think so, yeah. Because we tend so much to protect ourselves.
Yeah.
But by protecting ourselves, as also in the Gospel said, we may lose ourselves and our souls. And this is the problem. We should loosen it up sometimes more and let Christ ride us.
Yes. All right.